In a previous video, we talked about the possibility that reality is a projection of mind, that reality is in mind. I think most people, upon hearing this, would think it doesn't look like that, right? I mean, we don't seem to have control over reality. It seems to be something very separate from our minds. Well, I think what happens there is that when we think of mind, we tend to think about a very small part of mind, which in depth psychology is called the ego, which are the thoughts that we identify with and the thoughts that we think we have control over. But mind is much broader. Mind is a much, much bigger medium. For instance, when we have neuroses, obsessions, unexplained phobias, that's all in mind, but a part of mind that we don't identify with and that we don't have control over. Or when we have nightmares or dreams, clearly those are in mind, but a part of mind that we also don't identify with and that we don't have control over. So the hypothesis is that maybe it is a part of mind that you could call, according to depth psychology terminology, quote, the unconscious mind, that projects reality and therefore feels so separate, so detached from us. You might ask, well, how can mind be unconscious, right? Consciousness seems to be the sine qua non of mind, what mind means. It's something that is in consciousness. So how can there be an unconscious mind? I actually think that there is no such a thing as a truly unconscious mind. All the contents of the so-called, quote, unconscious are actually conscious. I think the difference is the following. What we normally call consciousness, or egoic consciousness, is a specific type of consciousness. It's what I call self-reflective consciousness. It comprises the things that not only we are aware of, but that we are aware that we are aware. For instance, I am aware of this room right now, but I am also aware that I am aware of it. So my awareness itself becomes an object of my awareness. And I'm also aware that I am aware that I am aware of it. And so on, in a kind of infinite recursion, much like two mirrors facing one another, reflecting each other's images, in a sort of infinite recursion that seems to go deep down into infinity. I think this is what egoic consciousness is. It's not only awareness, it's an infinite recursion of awareness, of awareness, of awareness, and so on. And this reinforces all the contents of consciousness that fall within this field of self-reflective awareness so much that it obfuscates everything else that we are actually aware of. So the unconscious becomes obfuscated like the light of the stars at noon. The photons coming from the stars are still hitting your retina, but they are obfuscated by the glare of the sun and the atmosphere. So I don't think there is an unconscious mind as such. I think there is only a part of mind that is conscious, but it's obfuscated by the field, by everything that falls within the field of self-reflective awareness, like the two facing mirrors. And that is the ego. For instance, some people drive home after work. They arrive home after a half an hour commute and they have no idea how they got home. They were aware of the drive, otherwise they wouldn't have made it home, but they were not aware that they were aware. Another example, if you're riding your bike, actually you are aware of every muscle movement you are making, but you're not aware that you're aware of them. You don't even think of them. So the fact that you're aware of something, but you don't know that you're aware of it, in practice is almost the same as being completely unconscious of it. It is not the same, but it feels as though it were the same. You cannot remember experiences that you were aware of, but you are not aware that you were aware of them. They are not conducive to memory formation. So there might be a lot of things going on that you're aware of right now in your entire, quote, unconscious mind, but you don't know that you know them. And if you don't know that you know them, you tell yourself that you don't know, and everything happens as if you really didn't know. The challenge, of course, is to come up with a metaphor to make sense of this, right? Mind itself, the medium of mind, is the subject of all knowledge. It cannot be an object of knowledge in the same way that the eye that sees cannot see itself without a mirror. So we can only talk about mind through metaphors, not in a literal way. And a metaphor I like is the metaphor of the membrane. Imagine that mind is a kind of membrane, like I have here in my hands, a two-dimensional membrane. It's a reflective membrane, like a mirror. And imagine that all of your thoughts, all of your emotions, your perceptions, everything that you have ever been conscious of in your entire life are just waves, vibrations in this membrane. If we have this metaphor, then all of reality are just oscillations in a membrane. And the only ontological primitive, the only thing that exists and cannot be explained, is the medium of mind itself. We know from the field of cymatics, the study of vibrations, that different vibrations can produce very different and very complex patterns. Static patterns in the case of standing waves, and dynamic patterns as well in the case of interference patterns. So to say that all of reality is a vibration or an oscillation in the medium of mind is not at all restrictive. That's a powerful enough metaphor to explain our entire three-dimensional world, the world of three dimensions of space. We just need a metaphorical membrane of mind that exists fundamentally in more than three dimensions, say a 10-dimensional membrane of mind. Oscillations in that hyperdimensional membrane can be certainly complex enough to generate all the patterns of existence. People, trees, planets, galaxies, everything, all phenomena can be modeled in that way, at least metaphorically. So this is not a restrictive metaphor at all. Everything can indeed be potentially a highly complex pattern of vibrations in the medium of mind. The implication of this metaphor of a membrane of mind is that there is only one medium of mind underlying all reality, all nature. And yet we have this perception that we are separate minds, right? I'm a separate person than you. I have my own thoughts. I identify with a separate part of the medium of mind than you. So how does this differentiation arise in the context of this metaphor? Why do I think that my mind is separate from everything else, if ultimately it is all only one medium of mind? Well, I have a little demonstration here in the context of the metaphor. Imagine that this hyperdimensional membrane of mind, the medium of existence, differentiates itself in a topological manner by having a segment of it rise and assume a certain topological configuration that makes it identifiable as a separate feature from the rest of the membrane. If you are a little bit acquainted with the physics of vibrations, you will know that because this segment, individuated segment here, this differentiated part of the membrane, has a different topological structure than the rest of the membrane, it will support different modes of vibration, different natural frequencies, if you will. It will still be connected and part of the whole. The vibrations of the broader membrane will still communicate, if you will, energetically with what goes on in this differentiated segment. They will communicate through resonance, but the modes of the broader membrane, the modes of vibration of the broader membrane will be differentiated from the modes of vibration of this differentiated segment. So this is an individual mind, like the mind of a cat or a dog or an insect. It is still not self-aware, not self-reflectively aware, like I talked about earlier in this video, but it is a differentiated segment. So how can we model now self-reflective awareness according to this membrane metaphor? We talked about the differentiation that could lead, for instance, to animal consciousness. But what about the consciousness we have of being aware, that we are aware of whatever we are aware of? Imagine that one of these differentiated segments that protrudes out of the plane of the membrane of mind eventually folds in on itself like this, forming a closed loop. And note that I'm using here aluminum paper because I want it to be part of the metaphor, that this is reflective, like a mirror, like the two facing mirrors that we talked about in the beginning. If a differentiated segment of the membrane of mind folds in on itself and forms a loop, there will be one part of it that will reflect like a mirror whatever oscillations are going on the other part of it. So they will self-reflect, just like those two mirrors, the oscillations that are going through each respective phase of this loop. This is, according to this metaphor, how self-reflective awareness arises in the medium of mind, in the form of human beings. So who are we in the context of this reflective membrane metaphor, right? Fundamentally, we are the one subject that exists in nature, the membrane itself, the only subject that there is. But this membrane, as we've seen, differentiates itself in the form of protrusions, topological structures that rise from its plane. And that creates very particular modes of vibration that give rise to the illusion of separateness, to the illusion of proprietary thoughts, if you will. And we, as human beings, are even more special in that sense, because this protrusion that corresponds to our own thoughts, our own idiosyncratic perceptions and mental life, has folded in on itself, creating this self-reflective awareness that characterizes human thought. So if we are these segments of the one membrane of mind that have folded in on themselves, what are the objects, right? What is the external world that we seem to perceive around us, other people, trees, animals, houses, cars, and so on and so forth? Well, in the context of this metaphor, the external world that we perceive from the point of view of our ego are simply the oscillations, the vibrations that are going across this folded loop of the membrane that we actually are. All the vibrations that are going across the membrane within this folded loop, and therefore enabling this self-reflective awareness that we call the ego, these oscillations are the external world, are the cars, the other people, the trees, the sun, the stars, and so forth. The unconscious, in the context of this metaphor, are all the vibrations that are taking place in the context of the wider membrane, but not directly within this folded-in loop that consists of your egoic awareness. The contents of your egoic awareness, your external world, are the vibrations within the loop. The unconscious are all the vibrations that are outside the loop that corresponds to your egoic awareness. There is an interplay between the two through resonance. The thoughts, the perceptions, the impressions, the intuitions, the feelings, the drives of the unconscious will resonate or not with the vibrations that are taking part within the loop that corresponds to your egoic awareness, and thereby influencing it. Think, for instance, of obsessions, of love at first sight, of intuitions, feelings about what you should do, although you can't reason why. This may be these resonances from the contents of the unconscious into this folded loop that corresponds to your ego. These vibrations of the unconscious in the broader context of the membrane are in awareness. We are all aware of them. We are just not aware that we are aware, because they do not fall within this loop that create this self-reflective awareness in the sense of those two mirrors facing each other. So they become obfuscated by the contents, the vibrations within the loops. And that's why they become, quote, unconscious. They are not really unconscious. They are in awareness, but they are obfuscated by the contents of our self-reflective awareness, which is the world of the ego, the world of regular, ordinary life. Well, if this metaphor is in some way correct, this membrane metaphor, then it seems to entail a fundamental trade-off in nature, right? When a protrusion of mind, of the medium of mind, folds in on itself, it enables self-reflective awareness. It enables one to know that one knows. This is a fundamental form of knowing. This is clearly a positive thing, this self-awareness, this understanding of what one is and what's going on. Bringing awareness to the position of subject of awareness itself. So these loops, these folded in loops, are clearly a step, quote, forward, if you will. It's a subjective thing to say, but I think it's a valid thing to say nonetheless. Now, when these loops form and fold in on themselves, they create the unconscious. They obfuscate everything else. So there's a price to pay for this self-awareness, for this self-reflective awareness. You forget everything that is not within the loop, all the oscillations, all the vibration modes that are not within the loop. That's a trade-off, it's a kind of a dilemma. So if you ask, where is this going? Where is this process going? Is there a telos? Is there a goal, an objective to the dance of existence? Is there a telos behind nature? If I would have to imagine one, I would say that that telos is the formation of one single giant loop encompassing the entire medium of mind. So you have 100% self-awareness, self-reflective awareness, self-knowledge, and yet nothing is left to the, quote, unconscious. Nothing is obfuscated. Nothing is forgotten. Knowledge is integral and complete. I would say that is the telos.